Thank you, Taylor. Sometimes it seems like we work together. It's just great. Jesus goes up on top of the mountain with Peter, James, and John, and is transfigured before them, and the voice of God is heard from heaven. We believe the voice of God was heard anytime Jesus spoke, but this is different. This came from heaven, and this only has happened a couple of times in the Bible, and very few times in the New Testament, where the voice of God transcends all our understanding about where heaven is and our universe, and actually comes and it is heard here on this earth. And it happens twice in Jesus' life that we know of. Both times it says, "This is my Son, the beloved, with whom I am well pleased," when he was baptized and when he was transfigured. But there was a little bit extra that was said here. Anybody catch it? Listen to him. If there was a message that God could send from the other side of the galaxy or the universe or wherever heaven is outside of our understanding, it is these three words, not claiming him as his son and then saying three words: listen to him. So the last month, we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus said several things that I think we need to revisit today, because it's hard to listen to Jesus. So I'd like to share with you for a moment, if it's okay, a conversation that I think I would have with Jesus if he was telling me personally the Sermon on the Mount. Is that okay? Okay. So let's start in Matthew 5. We heard this a couple weeks ago. Jesus said, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment, and anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." This is what I would say. Well, Jesus, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. I've been angry with many people, and I have called some people a fool. But let me tell you this. Every single person I've been angry with, well, most anyway, and every single person I've called a fool, well, most anyway, they deserved it. Right? Well, most of them at least. A week and a half ago, let me start 2 weeks ago, I got my oil changed and I got a coupon for a free car wash. And so I went to this place to get my free car wash. And the guy said, "Oh, you have a coupon for a free car wash. But if you upgrade to the Super Select Diamond whatever car wash, we'll do your whole car inside and out. And then if you come back within a week, we'll wash your car again." So I thought, well, that's a pretty good deal. So I bought that deal. So I held on to my receipt because I had a week to go back. That was on a Friday. It was on my day off. Don't worry, I get my car washed on my day off. But 6 days later on a Thursday, it was after hours, I went back. I drove all the way to this car wash in Colleyville from the other side of Colleyville, which we all know is like 4 miles long. But at the time of the day I drove, it took like 5 minutes. And so I get there and I say, "I'm here for my free car wash." And I showed the guy my receipt. The same guy who sold it to me. And he said, "Oh, you're a day late." I said, "What do you mean I'm a day late? I was here last Friday and it's Thursday. It's only been 6 days." He said, "Yeah, but you only have 5 days to come back and get your car washed." And I said, "No, you told me I had a week. And in my book, a week is 7 days." He said, "Well, I'm sorry, but you're a day late." So I kind of squinted my eyes like you do. And I said, "If I leave, I'm not coming back. Ever." And he said, "Okay." And so I drove away, angry. You ever drive away angry, and 5 minutes later you realize, man, I'm going in the wrong direction? But it felt good to be angry. I felt justified to be angry. And so Jesus, I just have to disagree. I don't feel like I was sinning when I was angry. Y'all, we know that feeling, right? Like, oh, that was a sin. I can feel it. Well, I didn't feel that. Jesus goes on to say in verse 29, if your right eye causes you to stumble, gouge it out and throw it away. And then in 30, and if your right hand causes you to stumble, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go to hell. Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. Sorry, Jesus. Verse 39. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn the other cheek also. I'm not doing that either. Several years ago, about 15 years ago, when I was around probably 20 years old, I used to go play pickup basketball a lot. And when you're playing pickup basketball, sometimes you argue over whether you were fouled or not. And I was playing against this guy who was quite a bit older than me, quite a bit shorter than me, quite a bit smaller than me. And we were arguing over something, and this guy, he slapped me. And immediately you could see the look on his face like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. And the look on my face was, you shouldn't have done that. And I thought to myself, I have been big my whole life. Ever since I was in first grade, I was the size of a fifth grader. And I have realized that there is nothing to gain by fighting somebody. I'm bigger than most everybody else. And so if I win, I just beat up a little kid. And if I lose, I got beat up by a little kid. And so I looked at the guy and I'm like, I'm not going to hit you back. But I would really recommend you don't try that again. I'm not going to turn the other cheek. Jesus says, verse 44, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And it's like, I'll work on that. I'll work on that. But I've got other things to work on first, like loving the members of my family. Because I have members of my family who live thousands of miles away, and I'm really not good at calling them often. And sometimes I miss birthdays, and I really need to work on loving the people in my family first. And once I get that figured out, I'd like to then move on to doing that Good Samaritan thing of loving people who are strangers, those who don't wish me harm. And once I get that figured out, then I'll start to think about loving my enemies. But I've got a lot of work to do before I get to that point. So let's just put that one on the back burner. And so then we move on to Matthew 6, where Jesus continues. Verse 3, but when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your giving may be in secret. Well, this is where I would ask an honest question. Can I let the IRS know? Because, especially this time of year, that helps a lot. And so it's not like I'm going to let them know either way. So don't take it personally, Jesus. Verse 24, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, I don't know that I serve money, but I also can't say that I hate it or that I despise it, because I like to do certain things, like eat, and that costs money. I'm rather fond of eating, as you might have guessed. I like to have clothes to wear, a house to live in, and I have dreams of being able to do things like providing an education for my daughter, and that takes money. Can you believe we registered her for preschool this week? She's going to preschool in the fall, and just to register her, put in an application, that costs money. And so, I'm just going to have to agree to disagree here, Jesus. I don't hate money and I don't despise money, but I certainly don't hate or despise you. You are my master. You're the reason I came to Texas. You're the reason that I'm here today, but I also need money to live. And then he says, verse 34, therefore do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. To which I have to ask Jesus a question. So are you saying worry is a sin? Because you're not like, hey, you don't need to worry. Everything's great. You're like, no, do not worry. In that way, thou shalt not worry. But I have to admit that I worry. Does anyone else here worry? I worry about a lot of things. I worry about stuff all the time. I worry about people. I worry about my sermons. I don't sleep well on Saturday nights. I worry that I'm going to get up here and totally forget what I was going to say. I worry about my daughter. I worry about my family. I worry about everything. And so I guess, I don't know, does that make me a sinner? When we don't worry about things, does that mean we don't fully trust God? I don't know. But if that's the case, I guess just another reason to admit my sin. Matthew 7, Jesus goes on to say, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged." So if I think someone is unworthy of God's love, does that mean I'm not worthy of God's love? Because I can tell you I've got a list. Does everyone here have a list of people that you're like, I don't even think God can love that person? I mean, there are some evil people, right? People who do bad things. And it's hard not to go through life not judging somebody. Verse 13, Jesus says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." First off, I've never fit in anything that was narrow. Jesus, you made me this way. I'm big-boned. Doesn't work. But, the thing that I would say is, well, you built the path. You built the gate. Why not build it wider? Why do you have to make it so difficult? Then he says, verse 21, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name drive out demons, and in your name perform many miracles?' Then I will tell them plainly, 'I never knew you. Away from me, you evildoers.'" And as I read that, after hearing everything else he had to say, I think to myself, well, I'm starting to think that I fit in the category of the evildoers. Starting to think that I fit in the category of evildoers. That's what happens, I guess, when you listen to Jesus. It's hard to listen to Jesus. It's hard to listen to Jesus for a number of reasons. First, we don't always agree with what Jesus said. Like what he says about being angry, or money, or worrying. Jesus often challenges our way of life. Like what he said about defending ourselves. And Jesus makes it sound so difficult to follow him. Like what he says about cutting our eyes out, cutting our hands off, and finding the narrow path. But the good news is we aren't the only ones who have trouble listening to Jesus. The disciples had their struggles too. The Transfiguration, the other people in the Transfiguration, Peter, James, and John, we know that they weren't perfect. We know that they struggled listening to Jesus. Just 6 days before the Transfiguration, Jesus was talking about how he was going to be crucified, and Peter pulled him aside and rebuked him and said, "Lord, don't talk like that. Don't say those things. That's not going to happen." Peter didn't agree with Jesus. After this, as Jesus was walking to Jerusalem, going to his certain death, James and John asked Jesus if they could sit at his left hand and right hand in glory when he comes into his kingdom. They wanted the best seats. They wanted to be rewarded for their faith, so much for doing anything in private, keeping it a secret. Come to think of it, we have no evidence to suggest that any of the disciples gouged out their eyes or cut off their hands or cut off their feet. They certainly weren't perfect. They listened to Jesus, but they struggled to do what Jesus said. And yet, Jesus tells them in the presence of God, do not be afraid. Standing on top of the mountain with God, Moses, Elijah, and everyone else watching, Jesus says, do not be afraid. And then he tells them something that I think is really important. And it wasn't until I was preparing the sermon that I understood, I think, the importance of this verse. Jesus said to them, "Tell nobody about this until the Son of Man has risen from the dead." Tell no one about this until I have died on the cross and come back. Because I think for us, everything that Jesus said and everything that Jesus did has to be looked upon through the lens of the crucifixion and the resurrection. Through the lens of God's love being revealed to us in sacrificial ways. So that we know when we disagree with Jesus, we do so knowing that the love of God is bigger. Thank God it is bigger than our egos. When we think that Jesus challenges our way of life, we do so knowing that our hope is to spend eternity in heaven where God's way of life is the only way of life. And when we think that following Jesus is so difficult, we do so knowing that God doesn't judge us on our failures, on our faults, but on our faith. We should listen to Jesus. We should strive to do what he told us to do. Not because we are afraid that we'll never find the narrow way. We should listen to Jesus because we trust that he knows what is best for us. And because we are thankful that on the cross, he opened wide the gate from here to here, and that is big enough for everyone. Amen.